Laheating! Hello everyone and welcome to my queer channel. I'm your host Queerchan, and today we are of course continuing our look at the line of Hasbro Neimoidian figures. As you can see, I'm still green, might be green for a while. And today we're going right back for me to what is, and how I said Newt Gunray was ground zero for Neimoidian collecting, but this particular figure that we're looking at today is ground zero for me. This is not only where my Neimoidian collection began, but my Star Wars collection as a whole. It wasn't the first Star Wars figure I ever got. I had a number as a young child, but this is the first figure I got that got me into serious collecting, and serious, of course, Neimoidian collecting. And it is, of course, the 2005 Revenge of the Sith Neimoidian Warrior. Now, this is in many ways a very unusual figure, in my opinion, because, first of all, I think the Neimoidian warriors actually were quite unusual themselves in the film for many people. You've had, up until that point, you've had, two and a half films in which the Neimoidians are portrayed as these horrendously greedy and cowardly businessmen, so to speak, and then suddenly, in the Mustafar war room, you get a glimpse of a Neimoidian soldier, a Neimoidian warrior. And it's just such a contrast between, again, what we've seen so far and what we see now. And in my opinion, I thought it was fantastic, because it really opened up another side of Neimoidian culture for me. Very much like the prequels opened up another side of Star Wars. I was actually very much that in reverse. Whereas the prequels added a level of politics and diplomacy, which I found very, very appealing. Others I know didn't. The Neimoidian warriors introduced the idea, of course, that there is a warrior culture, or a warrior side to the Neimoidians. There is a bit of a culture around it, and it's actually a very fascinating culture in my opinion. They are actually, based on the old canon, they are actually raised from grubs to be above bribery, to be more brave and altruistic. There's details about how they emerged from this ancient order called the Beetle Knights. I can only assume that they rode on harvester beetles. It might actually have to be something I draw at some point. Very fascinating. Even down to their armour, for example. You can take the helmet off on this, get to that in a minute. Down to their armour design, which, for example, the front of the helmet has a bit of a lip on it, which is designed to actually protect the cranial ridge of a Neimoidian, which is one of its most sensitive regions. So, again, it just opened up, in my opinion, so many levels to Neimoidian culture and what we had seen so far. And, of course, we got a nice little figure to go along with it. Now, very much how Dolte was a bit of an end of an era in terms of the quality of Star Wars figures, this one in some ways is as well. Now, I talked about during my Lot Dodd review the idea that the 2002 Saga line had a series of action features implemented into the figures, whereas previously, for the most part, they had just been standard articulated figures that you could play with. In the Saga line, the first Saga line, they introduced, as I said, some action features, whether they could fire blasters or had magnetic lightsaber hilts, to make the figures, I think, a bit more playable for children. Now, they were a bit hit and miss, both with collectors and I just, think in general. Just from what I've read about them, you either love them or you hate them. There's really no in-between. Well, I guess there is, because I'm actually fairly, I guess you say, ambivalent towards them. They never really bothered me one way or the other. I was always more interested in the character themselves. That action feature, the idea of the action features actually made it into the Revenge of the Sith line, and it was the last line of figures that actually used them. And again, it for some reason was a selling point of the figures. It didn't matter that they were Star Wars figures, been around since the 1970s. I don't know if any of you of watching have remember actually seeing the Revenge of the Sith packages, but they were sort of half ovular and had a picture of the character and a description of the action feature, what they did, and again, this was one of them. Now, I have to say I'm not too keen on the action feature with this figure because I think it severely restricts what the figure could otherwise have been capable of. Now, you get a trooper of any kind and you expect full body articulation. Unfortunately, that is not what you get with this figure. You would expect legs down articulation. Unfortunately, they are solid plastic. There's a little bit of articulation on the feet, but it's more or less useless because the knees don't bend and actually the legs barely even move, partially due to the protective skirt, but also because one of the legs contains the action feature. Now, I'm a bit embarrassed to say that, like a number of my other figures, I don't actually have the weapon on me that he came with. That's in a plastic bag in one of my collection boxes, and it's very easy to describe. It's just a very sort of long, thick rifle type feature, and of course it fired a projectile. Now, the idea was that for this action feature, you would put the rifle in his hands and, let's see if I can actually do this, squeeze his legs and he sort of turns and is supposed to fire. Or you can do that and just have some very basic waist articulation. As I say, I'm not too keen on the action feature on this figure. I think it just really more impedes what you could actually do with it. I'd actually like to see if someone managed to customise or properly customise one of these to give it proper full body articulation and remove the action feature, because I think that would have done so much better with this. I mean, I know you don't actually see the Neimoidian warriors in too much action in the films, but regardless, it still would be nice to have a trooper that you can actually, you know, pose and play around with, you know, especially if you're a kid. You know, you don't really want a solid lump of plastic to play with. Onto the figure itself, I have to say, for the most part, Neimoidian likenesses have been very good. This is an exception. I know a lot of people are actually very fond of the sculpt that they used for this because they thought it captured the sort of the Neimoidian facial sort of appearance while giving it a level of toughness that it needed. And yes, it does do that. If you're looking for that sort of thing, it does that very well, actually. I mean, it does very clearly look like a Neimoidian. Got good cranial ridge details. Very tiny head, though. I don't think Neimoidian heads are actually that small. But what I find very disappointing is that for the promotional images, the two Neimoidian warriors, the guards that you see in the Mustafar the war room, whose names are Gapnox and Fame Drimal, they've got very large eyes and sort of softer faces, very much actually similar to the arbitrary Neimoidian crew from The Invisible Hand. And I mean, that's almost certainly no doubt to the fact that down to the fact that they just use the same masks for the different characters. Oddly enough, I think this would have done so much better with a facial sculpt a bit more like Luce Rose Dauphine's, the sculpt that came with the Luce Rose Dauphine figure, because it much better captures the facial detail that was used in the promotional images. So yeah, and not only that, but as I said, the head is absolutely minuscule. Look at that. I mean, that's smaller than a human head. That's frightening. It works alright when you've got the helmet on, which adds a bit of bulk to it, but when you take it off, you very quickly realise that the bulk and the height the helmet adds is actually just sculpted in, and you've got a Neimoidian with a very serious case of microcephaly. The other bit that's a little bit disappointing is the lack of weathering anywhere. There's no details, nothing really to speak of on any of the armour. Now, I suppose that's actually fair enough, because you don't really see the Neimoidian warriors getting particularly dirty, or actually even in action, in Revenge of the Sith, or anything else for that matter. So, and it would make sense from a Neimoidian viewpoint to actually make sure that your guards, ceremonial or not, have immaculate armour at all times. But it just seems like they could have done quite a bit more with the armour to make it look that. It's just, in my opinion, a very, very standard, basic figure overall. Very good very good army building fodder, on the other hand. I know a number of people who have actually made full Neimoidian armies, and I'm amazed I didn't think of that. I'd actually like to go and see if I could build a small army of my own. It's my dream one of these days to actually make a either a Cato Neimoidian scene or a Mustafar war room scene, and of course both would require fairly copious amounts of Neimoidian guards. Other than that, though, it's a decent figure. I wouldn't say it's absolutely essential for a collection. It's a nice little background figure, and again, it's from those days when Hasbro was actually taking notice of background figures. Got a good little bit of articulation, and you could customise this decently, and if not the figure itself, certainly the different pieces of the figure, the head, for example, the helmet, even the body itself. So there is quite a lot to actually be done with the figure, and I think last I looked they are actually relatively easy and cheap to find, so very easy piece to pick up, though not necessarily essential. Regardless though, this figure takes me right back. As I said, this was the first Neimoidian I ever received. My mum brought it back to me from America while we were still living in Israel, and he's been with me ever since, and I absolutely love him to bits. So that's it for this figure. Thank you very much indeed for watching. If you haven't already, hit like, hit subscribe, share this video, have a laugh with your friends. For now though, I've been Quarechan, you've been amazing, thank you very much, and may the Force and Neimoidians be with you.